What if I told you that the future of Afghanistan, a country that had just come out of decades of war, was decided not in Kabul, not even in Asia, but in a single room, thousands of miles away in Germany? Imagine it just weeks after the fall of the Taliban. In 2001, a group of Afghan leaders, warlords, and exiles sat around a polished table in a German hotel under the watchful eyes of the United Nations and the United States. In that one room, the destiny of Afghanistan was quietly written. This is the story of the Bonn Agreement, how Afghanistan's future was decided in one room, and why this meeting became one of the most important and controversial moments in modern Afghan history. After the U.S. invasion in late 2001, Afghanistan was in complete disarray. The Taliban regime had collapsed, Al-Qaeda leaders were on the run, and the international community was searching for a solution that could bring stability to a country that had been torn apart by conflict for more than 20 years. Washington wanted a government that could be trusted, one that would align with Western interests but still appear Afghan-led. The United Nations saw a chance to rebuild an entire nation from scratch. But the question remained, who would rule Afghanistan now? In late November 2001, representatives of 4 major Afghan political groups were flown to Bonn, Germany. These were the Rome Group, loyal to former King Zahir Shah; the Northern Alliance, made up of anti-Taliban commanders; the Cyprus Group, representing exiled moderates; and the Peshawar Group, composed of Afghan refugees and Islamists based in Pakistan. Each group carried their own ambitions, fears, and promises. They were gathered in the luxurious Petersburg Hotel, a location chosen for privacy and diplomacy. Outside, it was freezing cold. Inside, history was being written. The conference was meant to create a roadmap for Afghanistan's political future. For the Americans, the goal was simple: form an interim government quickly, prevent chaos, and install a leadership friendly to Washington's mission. For the Afghans, it was far more complicated. Every faction wanted a piece of power. The Northern Alliance had military control inside Afghanistan, while the Rome Group had international backing. The negotiations were tense. Delegates argued for hours over who should lead the new administration. Some even threatened to walk out. But behind closed doors, quiet deals were being made. It was not just a political meeting, it was a game of survival, influence, and strategy. After days of secret talks, one name began to emerge, repeatedly: Hamid Karzai. He was a relatively unknown figure at the time, a tribal leader from Kandahar who had recently aligned with the U.S. and was seen as acceptable to all sides. The Americans favored him, the United Nations saw him as neutral, and the Afghan delegates agreed he could serve as a temporary leader. On December 5, 2001, the Bonn Agreement was officially signed. The document laid out the framework for Afghanistan as new government and announced Hamid Karzai as the head of the interim administration. The Bonn Agreement did more than just name a leader. It set up a plan for writing a new constitution, forming a transitional government, and eventually holding democratic elections. On paper, it was a blueprint for peace and democracy. But in reality, it was the beginning of a fragile experiment. Many Afghans had no say in what happened in Bonn. There were no Taliban representatives, no ordinary Afghan citizens, and few voices from rural areas. The agreement was created by elites, far from the villages that had suffered the most. This raised one critical question: can a nation's future truly be decided without its people? As the world celebrated the success of the Bonn talks, many Afghans felt disconnected. They watched as foreign powers dictated their political structure. The phrase "Afghanistan's future was decided in one room" became a symbol of lost sovereignty. Yet, for the United States and its allies, the Bonn Agreement was a triumph, a new beginning. After years of war, it gave legitimacy to foreign intervention and provided the foundation for building the Afghan state. International donors poured in money, institutions were created, and optimism filled the air. Afghanistan was finally on a new path, or so it seemed. Months later, Hamid Karzai took office in Kabul. The world media showed images of smiling faces and raised flags. But behind the cameras, Power struggles began to brew. Warlords returned to power. Corruption spread, and regional rivalries deepened. The Bonn Agreement had brought a temporary sense of order, but it had also planted the seeds of future instability. By excluding the Taliban and avoiding a broad-based national dialogue, it ensured that Afghanistan's wounds would not heal. The agreement built a political system, but not a national consensus. Even so, the Bonn process became a model for future international interventions. It showed how global diplomacy could shape a country's direction in a matter of days. Yet it also revealed the limits of external control. Afghanistan's history has always resisted outsiders, from the British Empire to the Soviet Union to the United States. Each tried to reshape it in their own image, and each eventually failed. The Bonn Agreement was a modern chapter in that same story, the world trying to fix Afghanistan without truly understanding it. Halfway through this story, let's pause for a second. If you're finding this history fascinating, don't forget to subscribe and stay connected for more deep insights into world events that shaped nations and changed destinies. As the years went on, Afghanistan's political system began to crack. Elections were held, constitutions were signed, but power remained concentrated among elites. The Bonn framework had given the country a roadmap, but the road itself was uneven. The Taliban, excluded from the process, slowly regrouped. In villages and mountains, resentment grew. People felt that their voices had been replaced by foreign decisions. The Bonn Agreement had promised peace, but 2 decades later, the war still raged on. When the U.S. finally withdrew in 2021, the Taliban returned to power, ending the very system that had been born in Bonn. So was the Bonn Agreement a success or a failure? It depends on how you look at it. In the short term, it stabilized Afghanistan and provided a political foundation. But in the long run, it failed to address the roots of the conflict. It ignored the realities on the ground and relied too heavily on international influence. Afghanistan needed an Afghan-led solution, not a Western-designed blueprint. The deal that once symbolized hope eventually became a reminder of lost opportunities. Today, when historians talk about the Bonn Agreement, they describe it as both a milestone and a mistake. It was a moment when the world came together to rebuild a shattered country, but it was also a lesson in how not to impose political systems. Afghanistan's journey since then reflects the deep tension between external control and internal sovereignty. Every superpower that entered Afghanistan believed it could shape its destiny. But Afghanistan has always been the graveyard of empires, and the Bonn Agreement, in many ways, was another chapter in that long history. As we look back, the images from Bonn tell a powerful story. Leaders shaking hands, cameras flashing, promises made. The world thought it had fixed Afghanistan. But behind every signature lay unspoken doubts. Could a deal signed in a quiet European hotel truly represent the will of millions living under the shadow of war? The answer became clear over the next 2 decades. The Bonn Agreement explained not just a political event, but a global lesson. Nations cannot be rebuilt from afar. Afghanistan's story proves that real peace must come from within, from its people, its history, and its culture. Every attempt to rewrite it from outside, no matter how well-intentioned, ends the same way. If you found this story insightful, make sure to share this video with your friends so more people can understand the history behind global politics. And if you want to explore more deep stories about Afghanistan, its politics, and its people, visit our channel for more detailed documentaries and breakdowns. Remember, Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires for a reason, and the Bonn Agreement was one more moment when the world tried to change it, but the mountains of history stood unchanged.